Well, Chelsea Football Club continued to be an absolute box office institution for right and wrong reasons. Of course, Frank Lampard has been dismissed from the managerial role, the first team head coach, whatever you want to call it. News has been exploding all over the gaff. With stories of him being sacked, people's opinions, people's reactions. There's been a lot of emotional reaction, understandably. Positives and negatives, of course. I have uploaded my emotional immediate reaction, but I wanted to do a video talking about the story behind Frank Lampard's dismissal. And this is coming from The Athletic. Yes, I promise I am not sponsored by The Athletic, but when they have such incredible insight behind the scenes on what went on with Frank Lampard and perhaps where it went wrong, you know, it's just an excellent resource for me. So I want to react to their extensive article written by a whole multitude of their writers, read through some of it, give you my opinions, and pretty much give you the scoop of what happened behind the scenes, courtesy of The Athletic in terms of the resource. So I feel it's my duty to plug them and urge you to go check out their writing and this story. But in this video, I'm going to be taking segments of the story and giving you my opinion on what happened with Frank Lampard and ultimately his demise at Chelsea Football Club. Consider subscribing to Football Therapy if you're new, daily content of course, and there's a lot of things going on at Stamford Bridge, Cobham at the moment, so you keep it locked, subscribe, bell notifications icon, and if you want to support my content and see me make more, consider dropping a like on this video as we move on into today's video. Right, so interestingly, Frank Lampard's troubles actually started before a ball was even kicked this season. Chelsea did have absolutely massive expectations for Frank Lampard, although they were incredibly impressed with his first season. With the amount of investment, they did expect a title charge. And by all accounts, The Athletic reports, as they've been informed by a source, as soon as he hits a bad run, say of 5 games, the club will look for a replacement and start investigating replacements. So perhaps long before you would have assumed they were looking into replacements, that's when they actually were, if that makes sense. So shocking really, but Chelsea is a business institution. They claim to have changed in terms of having a project with longevity, but ultimately they had an itchy trigger finger. You know, the statement came out today that they have sacked Frank Lampard, and interestingly, for the first time ever, Roman Abramovich has commented on a managerial dismissal. He said some words and was quoted talking about Frank Lampard, which has never happened before. It's usually Marina Granovskaya. Roman stays out of it. So that's an interesting factor in isolation. So I'm going to read through some of these bullet points off my phone from the Athletic article that explain what happened or some of the stuff they go through in said article. Lampard's relationship with influential director Marina Granovskaya deteriorated. Now off the bat, you can't have that. Marina is the head honcho. She runs Chelsea Football Club. Of course, her relationship with the likes of Antonio Conte broke down, and from there, Conte threw it in. Awful scenes, really. And you know, once that's happened with Marina, you can't go back. And you know, apparently it's quite easy to fall out with her, but she demands absolute success. So Lampard's relationship breaking down with Granovskaya would have been massive. Next bullet point is Ralf Rangnick was actually offered the Chelsea job as an interim coach to sort of come in now and see us out to the end of the season until perhaps they could address their options with either Tuchel or, you know, Nagelsmann or whatever they're looking at. But Ralf Rangnick turned down this interim opportunity, even though he's out of a job and was available essentially. So calls were made by Chelsea Football Club in recent weeks to sound out availability of course, Thomas Tuchel, the new Chelsea manager, his availability, but also Julian Nagelsmann, who, you know, is the coach of RB Leipzig and it's going very, very well at the moment. And I think that was the situation. They wanted to get Ralf Rangnick in for an interim sort of time until they could bring in Julian Nagelsmann as a long-term successor. But that wasn't to be. That didn't work out, hence Chelsea going with Thomas Tuchel. The next bullet point says the Leicester defeat was the tipping point for the powers that be at Chelsea Football Club, the point of no return, if you will, for Frank Lampard managing Chelsea. After said defeat at Leicester, Frank Lampard went around the dressing room and shook hands with his players and thanked them all for their efforts playing underneath him, seemingly knowing the writing was on the wall for him. And it makes you think now that when he gave Mason Mount the captaincy against Luton, that was his final act for his protege Mason Mount. He probably knew he was done as Chelsea manager. And if he wanted to give something back to Mason Mount, the player that had done the most for him and tried the hardest. So, I don't think he would have given them the captaincy in any other situation, even though you could argue he deserved it from his recent efforts. It was a nice touch from Frank Lampard. Perhaps his not dying because the dude's not dead, but his final wish to do something to a player, for a player that he believed so much in. But it wasn't all joyful behind the scenes with the players. Some of the players reportedly got frustrated with the lack of tactical nous from Frank Lampard at times, and some players also got frustrated that they were not spoken to for months. So it wasn't all joy. Frank Lampard did have a trusted bubble, and perhaps the players outside it got frustrated. And generally, there was probably a lack of belief developing in terms of his tactical instruction. So although some players believed in him, seemingly not all players believed in him. Another one of these bullet points breaking down the situation of Frank Lampard's dismissal from The Athletic is Declan Rice. Apparently his absolute will and desire to sign Declan Rice annoyed some of the Chelsea bosses, which is kind of interesting for me because if you look at Declan Rice, he is indeed a high profile target in the transfer window, and the likes of Manchester City and Manchester United all want him. Perhaps the Chelsea board didn't see Declan Rice in the same way as these guys. Very much a Frank Lampard target, not so much a Chelsea Football Club target. Back to the players not feeling overly happy with Frank Lampard. Apparently some sectors of the dressing room felt disappointed. There was little empathy shown to players at times, and often a lot of criticism. Although some people around football media and Chelsea fans understood Frank Lampard's criticism of the players perhaps not performing to their desired level, you can understand why that hurts players. Throwing them under the bus is never a good idea, especially from a manager of Frank Lampard's lack of experience. It's very, very difficult, and it's going to cause disharmony, even if some people agreed with Frank Lampard in terms of criticising poor performances, in terms of low effort. And the final bullet point in this breakdown from The Athletic is Lampard would have actually walked away had it been another club. He was unhappy with how things are going, perhaps of the breakdown in sort of relationship with Marina, Granovskaya. If it was any club, he probably would have been like, no, I'm not interested in this, it's not working. And clearly the chemistry is off and the relationship has broken down, which is a recurring narrative of Chelsea Football Club in terms of manager in board. But with Frank Lampard, like I've always said, you've got a completely unique situation where the manager would put the club before his own managerial success, and he loved the club and he wanted to do well for the club no matter what, hence him not walking away in this instance. So regarding Marina Granovskaya, I want to read a quote from The Athletic with her opinion developing of Frank Lampard. Marina said she was considering her strategy, was actively replanning the managerial situation, and would get back to them, a source reveals. I think they were a bit surprised by that because it was still so early and the managerial market would be better for Chelsea in the summer. Cech would have a role to play too naturally in his role as technical and performance advisor, holding informal discussions with the agents of key players about the Chelsea slump in form. He took part in training too, meaning Lampard had a strange situation to manage of support of his long-term friend, but knowing Cech is close to the club's hierarchy. Interesting, so Petr Cech's role at the club, he was talking to concerned player agents about the performance of Chelsea Football Club and indeed the performance of their clients, their players not playing well. It was Cech's responsibility to liaison with them and say, look, it's alright. And then he started training on the pitch so he could keep a close eye on them. I've spoken about this in a recent video. Cech is a good friend of Frank Lampard, but he takes his job seriously, and he'll put that above his friendship with Frank because he too loves the club and wants his career to be a success. So it was his job too to analyse what's going on at Chelsea, and he would have been involved in the conversation to sack Frank Lampard. Truth is, we all knew it was a risk hiring Frank Lampard, and this is an interesting quote here from The Athletic saying he actually had another job offer. As one insider explains, Lampard actually had a very good offer from another lucrative club, but this was Chelsea. He wasn't going to ignore them. Interesting, after Frank Lampard's debut season of management at Derby, he had a really good offer from a big club, but he had to turn them down because he had the opportunity to manage his club, Chelsea Football Club, a club very dear and close to his heart, and he backed himself. Seemingly, Frank Lampard had a lot of admirers for him as a manager to take a new job, so I kind of think he will go back into management and probably into a fairly decent job. Who knows, it would be box office to see him go to Celtic. Celtic versus Rangers, Lampard versus Gerrard, you know the rest. The article goes on to transfers and stuff like that. Frank Lampard, in January, when top four was under threat, he really interestingly really wanted Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. I think this is probably before he signed his contract extension at Arsenal, but Chelsea held out until the summer because they wanted to sign a long-term target in the shape of Timo Werner. Obviously a lot younger than Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and would probably be a better long-term club investment. So in terms of transfers, there was problems. I think Frank Lampard also really wanted Dries Mertens and was on the phone to him, but as soon as January last season, there was a rift between Frank Lampard and the Chelsea board, and that was largely down to transfers at the time and differing in opinion. I'll read you a quote here from the article explaining Frank Lampard's early frustrations. Lampard's growing frustration was evident during some tense post-match briefings with the media, which implied criticism of the hierarchy for the lack of new arrivals in January. One source said he was not happy behind the scenes either and described the bond with Marina as not being fantastic. So off the bat, yeah, he's early doors. This is like a year ago now. He already burnt his relationship with Marina Granovskaya. The article goes on to talk about Mauricio Pochettino, a really long-term target for Chelsea Football Club. They didn't sack Frank Lampard at the time because ultimately he achieved his targets and it went well, and after that they lost the opportunity to sign Mauricio Pochettino because he went to Paris Saint-Germain. But apparently, not only did Chelsea really want Pochettino, I've heard in other reports, Pochettino really wanted the Chelsea job, staying in London, an excellent squad, good salary and prestigious club in Chelsea Football Club. But ultimately, PSG was too good to turn down when he was unsure what was going on about Chelsea. Chelsea lose their main target in Mauricio Pochettino and start looking at alternatives like Julian Nagelsmann, Thomas Tuchel, etc. Another big factor in this story and downfall is Kepa Arrizabalaga. I'll read you another extract. One of the biggest points of contention was the treatment of goalkeeper Kepa Arrizabalaga. Chelsea paid a world record fee for the keeper in 2018. After a series of high-profile errors, Lampard left him out in favour of Willy Caballero for 6 games between January and February. The latter also started in the FA Cup semi-final, FA Cup final, and the must-win Premier League game against Wolves on the final day. Now, reportedly, they clashed over this situation, but I'm not sure why. I think everyone in the media, and certainly those Chelsea fans, absolutely understood why Frank Lampard had to drop Kepa, and it was the right decision. You could argue it was the decision that helped Chelsea reach top 4, that and also bringing Olivier Giroud back into the fold. So I'm not sure where the criticism would be there. I think everyone would agree Frank Lampard made the right decision, but ultimately in terms of a business perspective from Chelsea Football Club, that's their the largest outlay for an asset ever, and he was being frozen out regardless of form. They wanted it to work. But I don't think I have much sympathy for Marina Granovskaya in that instance. So the article goes on and talks about signings and what Frank Lampard wanted. It obviously speaks a lot about Declan Rice, how he really wanted him, and he wanted to get him in the winter window last year. Not only that, he wanted to bring in some defenders, and the clash between board, Marina and Frank Lampard continued and ultimately got a lot worse, sadly. And this, again, transfers are always an issue. Look at Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte. I mean, Frank saw issues, he wanted to remedy them with transfers. The club were not prepared to do that. The next part of the article talks about how after the Man City game, Roman Abramovich got very unhappy, and I can sympathise with Roman because that's my turning point with this current Chelsea regime and how Frank was doing. That was the most disappointing and dismal result for me. Roman Abramovich reportedly went from unhappy to furious after the Leicester City loss, and that was it. That was the tipping point of no return. Frank Lampard was no longer going to be Chelsea manager. That's all she wrote, and the Luton game was just a sort of didn't mean anything really, even though it was good that Chelsea qualified. So that's when the phone calls started. As I said at the top of the video, calls to Ralf Rangnick began. He refused to come in as an interim coach while Chelsea hoped to sign Julian Nagelsmann afterwards. And things started to become frantic in terms of finding a replacement for Frank Lampard. Another quote for you from the article. The hierarchy were determined to bring in a German speaker to bring out the best of Werner and Havertz, talking to former PSG manager Tuchel, and hitting a brick wall in initial discussions with Leipzig about Nagelsmann. Tuchel was reluctant to come midway through the season initially, but was eventually persuaded, having almost taken the Stamford Bridge job before Antonio Conte a few years ago. He felt it was too good a job to turn down. Lampard's time is up. The article goes on and you get more detail about everything that's happened, about the Germans, Werner, Havertz, Chelsea needing to get the best out of them with Thomas Tuchel. But ultimately, that's the story about Frank Lampard getting sacked. There was a lot of animosity between the board, there were some players that were unhappy, and really the writing was on the wall a long time ago. Ultimately, on the outside looking in, people, pundits will say this is a disgrace, this is bad, and it is showing a whole massive lack of emotion when it comes to it. And maybe they should have stuck by him in terms of results, looking a little bit better, and Frank actually developing as a coach himself. But the time is up, it's over. Frank Lampard is no longer Chelsea manager, and Thomas Tuchel will be the manager. When he's appointed, I will do another video. He may even be announced by the time this video goes out, but that's okay. This video is about Frank Lampard and how he got sacked, not about Thomas Tuchel. I will look at Thomas Tuchel a bit closer, talk about the players, talk about Tuchel as a coach, his statistics, win ratio, etc. So make sure you always swing around Football Therapy, swing by I'm trying to say, and check it out. Again, this information for this video has come from The Athletic, so do go check it out. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. Hopefully you enjoyed the content and me talking about this and telling you the story. Please do like the video, consider subbing, enjoy the football, and I will see you later.
You ain't so tough with that bad boy tuck. I'ma get it how I'm living, I'ma walk the walk. Outline my lines, I rap through thought. Body bag the verse, outlined in chalk. In my life seen trouble, hustle on the double. Silence on the trigger like my pick got a muzzle. Yo chick like to guzzle, bad boy stay in trouble. I only love this paper, sorry I don't. I laugh me, baby.